right, guys, welcome back to the channel. Here's a time for the first video of a new series. I'm going to try to make this a quick hitter, meaning videos probably under 45 minutes for me, ideally 12, right? What I will do is just give you my recommendations of what are the best exercises for each body part. Today, we're going to start with chest. So what are the best? It's weird because it's exactly where my face would normally be. Anyway, here you go, it fits better. So, all right. So what are the best exercises or exercise strategies for a bigger chest? Okay. And what you will learn from this whole series, not just this video, is that for me, the best exercises depend on two different things. First, your body type. Not everybody will benefit the same way from the same exercises. For example, individuals with longer limbs and a short torso will not benefit from the same strategy as someone with the opposite body type. For example, if you have longer limbs, then it will be easier for, in our case here, to develop the chest, but much harder to develop the triceps. So when you are on an exercise like a bench press, you will not compensate with the triceps quite as much. Whereas if you have shorter limbs, you will normally be triceps dominant. So in a bench press, you will tend to use a lot more tricep, a lot less pectoral, making that exercise not ideal for maximum chest development. So that will be the first thing we're going to be looking for, is the body type you have. Second, what hypertrophy strategy or mechanism will you be using? If we want to use muscle damage and mTOR activation, you will not need the same type of contraction as if you're using metabolic factors like lactic acid, lactate, growth factors accumulation. They will require different types of muscle contraction and require different exercises. So you will look at the best exercise for both types of strategies, as well as for the two main types of bodies, long limbs versus short limb. So let's first look at body type when it comes to the chest. If you have long limbs and a shorter torso, normally what is long limbs is when you do a wingspan test, so the arms are extended to your side, you calculate from fingertip to fingertip, and if it's more than your height, then you fall into the long limbs category. If it's equal or inferior to your height, then you fall in the short limb category, okay? Now, when it comes to pressing muscles, if you have long limbs, the chest will be at a mechanical advantage. It's much easier for these people to trigger growth in the pectorals, but it will be much harder, for example, to trigger growth in the triceps. Meaning that when they do the big basic lift, like a bench press, like an incline bench press, the body will naturally rely more on the pectorals. They will use less triceps dominant. So these movements will be perfectly fine to get maximum pectoral stimulation. So they also won't require as much direct work or isolation work for the pectorals, because they will get plenty of stimulation from the big basic pressing movement. So they will rely more on those big basic and less on isolation work. If they were, for example, and we will get to that in future videos, to focus on the triceps, which is the hardest pressing muscle for them to develop, they will need a more isolation exercise strategy than for the pectorals. If you look at the short limbs or long torso individuals, it's the opposite. They will normally be either triceps or deltoid dominant, depending on their shoulder width. If they have narrower shoulders and short arms, then they will be more naturally inclined to use a triceps as the prime movers in big pressing movement. So for them, a bench press will tend to develop the triceps more than the pectorals. And if they have, on top of the short arms, they have wide clavicle, the deltoids will be at an advantage. So that will take most of the work and most of the stimulation on those big pressing movements. So if you give a dip, a bench press or an incline press to someone with short limbs, they will tend to develop the triceps and deltoid a lot more than the pectorals. Just using myself as an example, I fall in that category. Even when I was my strongest on the bench press, which is 445 and 425 for a double, I had zero or very little pectoral development. Only when I moved to more of a bodybuilding approach using tons of isolation work for the chest did my pectoral grow. optimally, right? So they will need less focus on those big movements and more on isolation work. And even on the big compound movement, they will need to rely on versions that take their dominance out of the equation. If you're shoulder dominant, well, don't use an incline press, because the shoulders will just become massively developed and you will get next to nothing pectoral development, and you will just emphasize that difference in strength that much more. If you look at the training strategy, you look at muscle damage, mTOR activation, and you look at metabolic factors. Muscle damage, mTOR activation. You need to stretch, lengthen the muscle fiber of a muscle while they are under tension. The more you can stretch that muscle, the more growth you get from that mechanism. And I like to say the muscle being stretched the most in that exercise is the muscle being recruited the most. And that's in part what explains the dominance of certain muscle group, like chest for long limb individuals, because the chest will be stretched more than for a person with short limbs because of a lever issue. Now, you also want to go with an exercise where you can put a lot of load, a lot of tension on that muscle while you are stretching it, which explains that the big basic lifts using heavier weights while the target muscle works over the full range of motion is the best strategy for the maximized muscle damage and mTOR activation. You will also use heavier load, so 6 to 10 reps per set when it comes to hypertrophy. When it comes to metabolic factors, we are talking about maximizing lactate, maximizing growth factor accumulation. So you want to keep that muscle under tension. So you need an exercise with a peak contraction. For example, let's take a bench press. You have very little pectoral tension at the top of the movement. So that is not a great exercise to focus on metabolic factors. You also need more of an isolation movement, because if 3 or 4 different muscles are involved in the movement, the stress can shift more from one muscle to the other depending on where you are in the range of motion. It's harder to keep the target muscle under constant tension. And you will also use higher reps, a longer time under tension, so 10, 15 reps per set for a 40 to 60 seconds per set. That would be for the metabolic factors. So if we look at the best strategies, long limb lifters, the best chest exercise. Again, these are choices. You don't do all of them in the same workout, for example. These are exercises you pick from. Normally, the long limb lifter would use more of the big basics. So they could actually use all 3 suggestions there, but they would only need 1, if at all, of the metabolic factor exercises. So the best exercise would be your bread and butter lift, the bench press, the dip, and the incline dumbbell press or incline barbell press. Now, if I use the barbell bench press, I prefer to use the incline dumbbell version. If I use like dumbbell press, I would use the incline barbell press, just to give a different stimulus, right? So the long limb lifters, they don't need to shy away from those big basics, because the pectorals will be the dominant pressing muscle anyway. So these bread and butter lifts will work optimally to trigger maximum pectoral growth. There's something to be said about using more dumbbell exercises when you have long limbs. It tends to work a little bit better than a barbell, but it might not make that huge of a difference. For if you want to have metabolic factor exercise, isolation movement, you probably only need 1 per workout, if at all. Then you could pick pretty much anything that will work fine, because you will have no compensation mechanisms, because pectoral is the main pressing muscle you're using anyway. People with short limbs and a narrow clavicle, so triceps dominant. Now, for the muscle damage approach, a big basic lift, you will want to use variations where the triceps can't work as much or will not be stretched as much. Remember, the muscle being stretched the most is the muscle being recruited the most. So with a wide grip bench press, for example, you don't stretch or you don't involve the triceps as much. Power flies. Power fly is a dumbbell fly. It's a mix between a dumbbell fly and a dumbbell press. So you do like a fly, but with a lot more elbows bent, and you actually press when you go up. So it's like a dumbbell press with the elbows a bit wider. You can also use a dumbbell fly press. You do the eccentric as a dumbbell fly. I'm going to show that in a moment. And you do the concentric as a dumbbell press, allowing you to use more weight than a regular dumbbell flies. So these will be exercises allowing you to put a lot of stress on the pectorals without compensating with the triceps. Now, the people with short limbs, either narrow clavicle or wider clavicle, they need to put more emphasis on the isolation exercises when it comes to pectoral. So you might pick only one big basic lift, but 2 or 3 of the isolation exercises. And you would want to use exercises where you don't use the triceps as much, or a pec deck, cable flies, or a squeeze press, which I will also show in a moment. So these would be all good choices. If you have short limbs and a wide clavicle, okay, well, the muscle damage, you will be more prone to use your deltoids. That will be your dominance. You will also, basically, you will use both deltoids and triceps pretty much. So that this is the worst body type to develop big pectorals. So you could go with a wide grip decline press. By going on the decline, you decrease the action of the deltoids. So you will shift more of the stress on the pectoral. You can go with a power decline fly. Once again, same like a combination of dumbbell fly and dumbbell press, but decline to take the shoulders out of it, and decline dumbbell fly press. Basically the same exercises as before, but now we go on a decline to minimize deltoid involvement in the exercise. Basically, you want to take your dominance out of the movement. Now, if you were training for strength, then you would use the variations where your strength is at its advantage. So if you have me, when I was shooting for a big bench press, I just stuck with regular bench pressing, because it puts me in a great position to use my triceps. Now, if I want to use to build my pecs, then I would want to take those triceps out of the equation, okay? Metabolic factors, once again, these guys, short limbs, one big basic lift, 2 or 3 isolation movement. You want to take the deltoids out of the movement, so the angle will be different. A cable crossover, so from high to low, deltoids don't work as much. A decline dumbbell or cable flies, once again, to take the deltoid out of the movement, and a decline squeeze press or X press, once again, to take the deltoid out of the movement. It's not that complicated. The best exercises are those that allow you to shift the stress on your own weakness. Now, just to example here, I have the videos don't work. Edit. Je pensais que les vidéos fonctionneraient. Ça a l'air que ça ne fonctionne pas. C'est ça que j'ai dit, je le ferais. OK, je vais recommencer ici. So these are my best strategies depending on your body type as well as the metabolic factors. Now, some exercises here, like the squeeze press, the double fly press, might not be known to you. You can easily find them on the internet. I will do videos on them in the future to teach you how to do these exercises properly as soon as my gym studio is set up. So thank you for watching. Hopefully, I will help you build bigger pecs, which seems to be like the #1 priority of young kids these days. So stay strong and build those chests.